Good evening and welcome to everyone joining us this evening. We're a small but very selected group, and I hope that you will enjoy some of the last sessions for this year. I'm going to journey with you first by presenting, as usual, the formal presentation, and then afterwards we will be sharing some ideas that you can post in the question and answer session. And on our topic of the conversation this evening, you might actively also want to post. We're going to talk about argumentation and scholarly writing, but also about thesis statements. So if you, after the presentation, would like to have your hand at a thesis statement or developing one, then you're also welcome to put that in the question and answers, and we can maybe discuss that as well. So for now, I'm going to stop sharing my camera, and just maybe, by the way, I'm Professor Jeanette Norrit. Sorry for not introducing myself. Okay, here we go. Right, so our topic for this evening is scholarly argumentation revisited, developing advanced scholarly writing within postgraduate work. So the title is quite a mouthful. Firstly, it talks about argumentation, then it talks about revisited, and that meaning that we have through the year maybe already addressed some of the aspects of scholarly argumentation, and definitely we have addressed some aspects in terms of scholarly writing. So some aspects of this evening's presentation might be familiar, some of it might be revisited, some as a recap, and maybe there's something that you will learn that's completely new. So this is an advanced presentation, but I have tried to recap some of the basic building blocks that we need before we can engage in scholarly argumentation, or before we engaged in advanced scholarly writing within your postgraduate work and space. So when we talk about the presentation tonight, rather than being a writing workshop, is rather just giving, like peeping through a keyhole. And it will give you some ideas as to what you can expect. But because this isn't an active writing workshop, it will provide you with prompts, some exercises and some ideas that you can try out after tonight's session. So I still hope that this might be, some aspects might be eye-opening for you, some aspects that you might go back and revisit, and some aspects of your scholarly work that you can maybe just try and refine. So having said that, I would like to ask you a question. In your mind or on a piece of paper, can you complete the sentence? Academic writing is. Maybe a word or a phrase comes up in your mind. Maybe it's a picture that comes to mind. But if the first thing that comes to mind when you think about academic writing, what would it be? So academic writing is. I'm just going to pause for a second or two and just have you gather maybe a word or a phrase or something that comes to mind when you think about academic writing or scholarly writing. Now, I doubt that most of you came up with the following words, that it's easy peasy. If there are, I am very glad and happy for you, but I doubt that you might feel that it's easy peasy, that it's fun, that it is a walk in the park, and many of you might actually feel like some of these drawings which were drawn by people in the academic space. You might find that it's very restrictive, that it's not very creative, that you need to follow rules and like a ruler, that there's someone who tells you what to do and you just need to smile and comply. You might feel that most of this work takes place at night when the moon is up in front of your computer with a lot of books and you feel like crying, or you feel disheartened, or that you just put your hands up in the air and say you are unsure, you don't know, and this raggedy mouth is definitely not happy. So I just, in terms of these pictures, to give you some background, these pictures were drawn by academics, not students. So if you are feeling like this in this space, please know that you are not alone, and that most of us feel like this at some time in our writing journey, especially in the beginning. It gets better with time, the more you practice, but you often get back into this space where you are unsure and uncertain. So I really hope that after this hour or hour and a half, that we might bring you some more clarity, and some of the anxiety is maybe relieved. So to start off with, when we talk about academic or scholarly writing, it's very important to know that academic writing is no one's first language. So we often think that, English is very seldom our first language, and that is an additional often challenge. But academic writing is something that all of us need to learn, or must have learned early in our journeys in the postgraduate space. So it is something that needs to be learned. It's easier for some people maybe, but it is something that we all need to learn. So when we think about what is scholarly writing, it's academic writing. And in the scholarly space, our audience is different. Usually our audience that we write for now is no longer our friends. It's no longer business proposals if you're already working and maybe have access to that. We are now writing for specialists in our field, the examiner, or for a greater audience once we start publishing. Our academic voice is also different from our everyday speaking. It's more formal than writing to a friend. It's less formal than a business proposal, but there is a certain stance of formality. Our vocabulary also shifts. It's more persuasive and less expressive, and it's not colloquial. So there's no Kants and Joburg and the rest. It is more formal. Another way of comparing scholarly writing is between your personal writing and scholarly writing. When we write personally, it usually describes or recounts a personal story. With scholarly writing, however, our analysis develops an argument. So the writing is more specific, as our language is also no longer casual as in personal writing. Our academic writing is very subject specific, it's precise, and it's reasoned. In personal writing, the writer's experiences, feelings, and opinions are at the center. However, in academic or scholarly writing, evidence and arguments are at the center. We reference, we cite to acknowledge other people's ideas. So there's a clear distinction between the two writing forms. That doesn't mean to say that you can't express your feelings or opinions in scholarly writing. You most definitely can, but it is well reasoned and argued before you get to an opinion. So in personal writing, it's easy to say or to have an opinion about a subject, and you don't need to justify it. It's simply your opinion. However, in academic writing, it is argued before you get to a conclusion, or that you can present a specific claim. So let's have a look at some of the aspects that we need to attend to in terms of developing our voice, our academic writing voice. So as much as we speak and we have a voice in everyday language, when we write academically, we also need to develop a voice. So In your undergrad experiences, you often might have learned rote learning, where you learned catchwords or catchphrases, and that could get you by in terms of answering papers or answering exam questions. However, when you start your writing in your postgrad work, you often model and adopt in the beginning before you develop your own personal voice. So modeling and adopting is often done in the early stages of your writing, scholarly writing, where you read what the experts in your field have said, and you might model your writing according to what you read, or adopting a certain voice or style once you have read widely. And it is okay to do that. The only caveat is that you need to understand what you are reading in order to model or adopt. If you model and adopt a certain voice or a certain stance, and you don't understand what the words mean, or understand what you are reading, and now try and model and use and adopt it, this might become problematic and you might be caught out. So though this is a very good strategy in the beginning, please make very sure that you understand the terminology and words if you are adopting or modeling from certain conventions or certain people in your field. In order for you to be able to do that, you need to be able to read. And I've said read many times. It's not a spelling mistake. But the only way that you can develop a voice or develop an argumentative writing technique is through reading. There is no other way. You have to start reading first, and then you have to practice writing. So before we attend to matters of writing, there is a pre-drafting stage where we read, we investigate, or we read or refine about a topic. We think, we take notes, we try and see the problem. And this doesn't involve possibly writing yet. So long before we start writing, we start with pre-drafts, which includes reading, thinking, taking notes, and trying to see the problem. Our first draft might be when you start mapping your thoughts. Now, I'm a great advocate for mind maps and mapping your thoughts. The reason for this is that it is easier to move thoughts around in a mind map than what it is to start moving thoughts and writing around once you have written sections. So I will come back to this issue, but it's critically important that you map your thoughts, because it also starts giving you clarity in terms of what your thinking is. I often find students writing messy, and I know that their writing turns up messy because their thoughts are still messy. So you can write yourself out of a messy piece of work, but it's much more difficult. So I would really advise that you map, and I will show you strategies for doing that, maybe pre-writing or in your first draft. That way you can make sure that your ideas are logical, that it's coherent, and that it makes sense. So before we start writing, we are involved with conceptual activities. nice way of saying reading, thinking, and taking notes and then mapping this. We are now in a conceptual phase of the process. So very important to start with these processes and then start with first drafts. You will have many drafts in the process of your writing, but mapping your thoughts is often the first step towards getting your thoughts and your ideas sorted on paper. So there's 4 parts to academic writing. As the title when we started tonight quite rightly suggested, the first part of our academic writing is argument. It's also made up of paragraphs, evidence, and voice. So I've spoken a bit about voice, and so I think we've dealt with that aspect first. So what we are going to try and do now is find our way through arguments followed by paragraphs and evidence, because this makes up your academic writing. Your academic writing can't happen with any of these parts missing. So let's have a look at argument. An argument, or your research argument, is about developing a perspective on your topic. It's more than discussing your topic or sharing facts or information. Now, when we talk about an argument is made up of a thesis statement. Now, in the context of academic writing, thesis refers to your central point. It's not thesis such as the outcome or the end product of a PhD. In this context, we refer to a thesis or a thesis statement as a central point that you either want to explore or argue that's logically based on evidence. So a thesis is not a topic, it's not a fact, and it's not an opinion. And I'm going to go through the process of developing a thesis or a thesis statement. Now, an argument means exactly that. It is a statement that you are able to argue either for or possibly against. So it follows then that a thesis statement in an argumentative form of writing is a statement that you can either rally towards or that you might differ from. So an effective thesis is definable and an arguable claim. So when we look at a thesis statement, very important to remember, it is a central point. And if you can remember that a thesis is a central point, and you can remember the central point throughout your writing of your scholarly work, you would have achieved a lot. So to get that central point and that thesis clarified and cleared as early as possible would serve you well in terms of your writing, because it keeps you focused and it keeps your reading focused, and in the end it will also keep your reader focused. So again, a thesis is a central point that you either want to make, explore, or argue based on evidence. So let's have a look when we start what the criteria in terms of what a thesis or a thesis statement is. Now, at this point, you might become very worried or frantic because you might think, oh my goodness, I don't have a thesis statement. And it's often, some authors always have a thesis statement as a heading. But I found that at UNISA it is more subdued because we don't often have a heading that says thesis statement. We might have a heading that says our aim, our purpose. We might have a heading that says our research questions. But often in our dissertations and thesis outputs at UNISA, we don't have a specific heading that says this is the thesis statement. You might do well in having that, but often the thesis statement is found somewhere in your writing. Now, usually it is one sentence, could be 2 or 3 depending on the scope, but usually it's one sentence. It's typically the last sentence of your introduction, or it's near the end of the introduction. Remember, we said it is the main point that you want to make. It's a declaration, it's not a question. So please know that it's different from a research question. It might develop from one, but it's not stated as a research question. This statement clearly explains the main point of your dissertation or your thesis outcome. So, what is your main outcome? What is it that you want to achieve, that you are developing, that you are pointing towards? There could be sub-points, but be careful of sub-points. Ideally, a thesis is a one-sentence statement or one sentence main point that you want to make. Now, if you think that a dissertation or a thesis is quite a number of thousands of words, then it's quite striking to think, well, am I able to put this in one clear, plain or point that I want to make throughout my dissertation, throughout my thesis, or if you are publishing a paper, the main point of the entire paper. So you can imagine that this takes some time in terms of thinking, reading, and developing. So if by now you might be very anxious and you might be wondering, oh my goodness, where's my thesis statement in your dissertation or in your thesis? And I am not developing an argue, even if you are using expository or explanatory writing, there should still be evidence of a thesis. You need to tell the reader what you are going to explain or what you are going to do. You need to tell them how are you going to organize your explanation and why you should do it in this way. So let's maybe give you an example of a thesis statement. Now, the topic in these statements is around climate change. The first statement says that the federal government should act now on climate change. Now, that might be a very broad statement. We know now that the federal government is involved and there's some aspect on climate change involved. But it doesn't present an arguable statement. If we change it that local government can combat climate change by providing citizens with larger recycling bins and offering local classes about composting and conservation, that might be closer to a thesis statement. So what makes it different? In the first aspect, we still have the local government or federal government. For instance, federal government would be more in the States, they call it the federal government. So in South Africa, we might rather say local government. But see how strong the word combat, the action verb, is a very strong action verb. So acting now and combating climate change is quite a strong shift in terms of making a very strong statement. Now, this statement also now provides you with a tentative idea about the aspects that might follow in terms of how they're going to do that. So this person seems to be arguing that this can be done through giving larger recycle bins and offering classes about composting and conservation. So already you know now that the broader topic of climate change is brought down to local government, and it deals with issues combating climate change on a very local perspective. So it's not what governments can do in terms of policy. The reader is now guided. The reader doesn't expect to see what governments can do in terms of policy or laws or in hospitals, or they have a very clear sense that very specific aspects are going to be addressed in this dissertation, thesis, or maybe in a paper. So if you are still unsure about your thesis statement, ask yourself, what is the main point I want to investigate or discuss? And this might happen after a lot of reading, writing, going back and forth to identify your main point. What is the main point you want to make? In the case, that example we had, is that author was very specific in terms of the point they wanted to, what they wanted to investigate or discuss, and the point they wanted to make. And what do I have to do to include to make the point clear? If you are still very concerned and you still don't imagine how you could develop a thesis statement, you can turn your purpose statement of your dissertation or of your thesis into a thesis statement. So if you have a look at your purpose statement in your proposal now, or in your chapters, or in your dissertation, you can, so your purpose statement, usually we would say, the purpose of this study is to maybe explore and describe stakeholders' experiences on climate change in local government in order to address issues on grassroots level, for instance. So now you can take that explore and describe or understanding statement and change it into a statement, and no longer what you are, your purpose statement per se. So if you are still very confused about your main point that you're trying to make in your proposal, your dissertation, or your thesis, go back to your purpose statement and see if you can turn that purpose statement into your thesis statement. For a PhD study, your thesis statement will usually include what is the outcome of your study. So for instance, if I said I want to develop psychoeducational strategies for supervisors in order to facilitate mental well-being, then that could be turned into a thesis statement saying psychoeducational strategies is critical to facilitate the mental well-being of students, for instance. So if you are still struggling with a thesis statement, try and look at your purpose statement and see if your central idea is brought out there. So now you can work back and forth. One would imagine that your thesis statement, large aspects of that is appearing in your title, that it would appear in your introduction, and that there will be alignment between your thesis statement, your purpose, and then the outcome of your study. So your thesis statement in the beginning isn't maybe as clear as you might read thesis statements when they are already in a completed dissertation or a thesis. So how do we move from an initial thesis to a final thesis? So how do we move from a point of view, an initial point of view, to a final point of view or a final thesis? So we would start with our topic. Usually, once we have read widely about our topic, we are able to potentially have tentative research questions that we are left with. We might now do some exploratory writing, jotting down ideas, reading a bit more, mapping our ideas, and then we might come with an initial thesis statement. As we progress maybe with our research, say you have now done a complete literature review or scoping review or a systematic integrative review, and you have now refined that topic, or you now realize where's the gap, you might then start writing and revising an argument, and you might have come to some conclusions, which might lead to a final thesis statement. So there is, as much as there is a pre-writing process, there's also a pre-thesis process, and that's a process of reading, refining, exploring, coming up with an initial central point. You might explore and write further before you get to your final thesis statement. So the process then, in terms of what do we do with a thesis statement, we would now have our thesis statement in our introduction and, very importantly, in our conclusion. So when we have a look at an argument, I've given you a equation for an argument that you might do well in remembering. So the equation is A, capital A equals E, and then in brackets lowercase a plus D plus D plus E. The C is just now moved in the slide. I'm sorry, it should be underneath the top line, and the C is for would then stand for your conclusion. So A is your argument. Your argument consists of evidence, which you have analyzed, discussed, described, and evaluated in order to reach a conclusion. So we will go back to writing an introduction and the thesis statement, but I'm going to also come back to this equation for making sure that you have all the components of your argument. So we have just ended, in terms of writing an introduction and a conclusion, that your thesis statement would be evident in your introduction and in your conclusion. So let's have a look when we now move it into writing an introduction and see where our thesis or our central idea is lying. So in your introduction, you would typically have these 5 aspects. You would typically, in your introduction of your proposal or your introduction, or in your first chapter, or in the introduction of a paper, give the context or background of the topic to be explored. Now, background is exactly that. It's not yet the problem statement. It's the background of the topic. So say, for instance, as in the climate change, we would give the background to climate change, not yet the problem necessarily. We would now move from the background to present our thesis or our central unifying idea. What is the central point that you like to make? And then you would forecast the structure of the paper, your dissertation, thesis, chapter, or proposal. You might, with your thesis statement, provide a reason, or you can't yet maybe in depth give evidence, but you might give a brief reason for your specific point of view, but you are not going to go into detail. It's merely an introduction, and then possibly relate your work to other work in the field. So in the beginning, we said that you'll find your thesis statement usually towards the end of your introduction. Or somewhere in your introduction, but your thesis statement needs to be presented early in your academic writing. Now, when I evaluate a dissertation or a thesis, I read the introduction first and I read the conclusion right at the end. And the reason why I do that is exactly for these reasons. I check in the introduction for the central idea, the central thesis, and then I go back and read the conclusion, because your conclusion should mirror your introduction. I now look for the statement and your argument and whether it has been reached. So a conclusion is not a summary. It's the culmination of your argument. And that argument started in your thesis statement, in your introduction. So you want to tell the reader that you have accomplished which you set out to do. So your thesis at the end of your dissertation can now be stated more fully, assertively, and more powerful than you were able to do in your introduction. But it's critical that these two aspects, your introduction and your conclusion, holds hand. And the middle, what happens between the introduction and your conclusion, is usually based out of how you went about it and the evidence that you gathered in order to finally tell the reader how you have achieved what you have claimed in the beginning, the culmination of your argument, and that you have accomplished what you set out to do. And I am very critical if I read the introduction and I read the conclusion and I cannot find a thesis statement, or I cannot find that it has culminated in the conclusion to the claims that you made in your thesis statement or in your argument in the beginning of your dissertation. So I now want to go to how we develop our writing style in order to develop our arguments. So very often you might get feedback that says your argument isn't strongly developed, or there is some aspects of your argument that is not thoroughly developed. Now, as much as we have a thesis statement, and we have an introduction and a conclusion, our writing is made up out of sentences and paragraphs. So remember in the beginning we said we have argumentative writing, or your academic writing consists of arguments, paragraphs. Now, so let's have a look as to how we now put our paragraphs together to write about our topics, our thesis statements, and how we write up the evidence. So paragraphs is a central aspect of how we develop our writing. And I often find that when we do not plot and plan what we want to write, that our paragraphs become very random and the information in a paragraph becomes very random. So very important to remember that each paragraph contains a topic sentence. So if you imagine a parent holding their children's hand. Now the parent can be seen as your thesis and your body paragraphs as the children. So it's very important that in your writing that your parent, your thesis, and your individual paragraphs hold hands and that there is not a disconnect. So a topic sentence is usually the first sentence of your paragraph. And your paragraph then only addresses that specific topic of that paragraph, and it's linking to the main parent or the main thesis. So a topic sentence appears in the beginning of every paragraph, every body paragraph, and it breaks down the sub-points of the main point. So the main point, the thesis, is your parent, and your topic sentences are the parent's children. So very important, if you can imagine that when you are now looking at your writing, are you able to identify the parent, the thesis statement? Are you able to identify each paragraph, the topic sentence of that paragraph? And very important, do they hold hands? So another way of explaining that paragraphs are your textual building blocks. So with each building block, if we look at the bottom blocks, the yellow, a green, and a red box, if we see them as paragraphs, then each of these blocks might be a paragraph with a specific topic sentence. But there is a connection between these paragraphs. So in our paragraphs, as much as we then textually build the building blocks of our argument, it also signals and signposts what we are about to write. And they cannot stand loose from each other. They need to hold hands. So often we talk about the logical flow. And this is about our building blocks that you need to explain to the reader how they hold hands and how they are signaling and posting how you are proceeding with your argument or your writing. So your body, each paragraph, very important, has one point. So you write the entire paragraph related to the topic sentence that you had in the beginning. So if you are talking about the yellow building block, then that paragraph has one topic, and you address that one topic in its totality in that one paragraph. And then you move on to the next paragraph and you signal to the reader how they hold hands. So there's a topic sentence in each paragraph. The topic sentence relates to the thesis or the main point. The topic sentence has a point of view. Its supporting points are in logical order, and the sources of information is integrated. Very important, there's a logical order of the paragraphs. The parents and the children need to hold hands, and very importantly, don't repeat information. Decide under which topic, sentence, or which paragraph the information is best suited. Present it once and finish it off. There's nothing as irritating in reading to read and then you think, oh, but I've read this before. Or I thought that the writer was finished discussing this topic. Now I see it randomly appearing again in another paragraph. So please make sure that every idea is related in a paragraph to the topic, and that the topics are related to the parent, to the thesis. Please take out any irrelevant ideas or things that you might have thought about that's not supported or that doesn't make sense in the body of your writing. So just to recap, your thesis statement is your main claim. It's in your introduction and it holds hands with your conclusion. It's made out of paragraphs. Each paragraph has a topic sentence. Each topic sentence relates to the thesis and relates specifically what is in terms of what's written in the paragraph. And very, very important, it has to be in logical order. Now, that's why I'm coming back to the issue around mind mapping. If you have a mind map and you have mapped your thoughts and ideas, you can also, it's easier in a mind map to see and evaluate whether there's logical congruence than what it is to read through 3 or 4 pages and then try to find out if there is logical ordering. It's very difficult to figure out logical ordering in over a number of pages. So if you are struggling with logical ordering or your supervisor tells you that there's no logical order in your writing, take each paragraph that you have written. Make sure that you are able to identify a topic sentence in each paragraph, that each paragraph discusses that topic fully, that you have a linking sentence or you indicate how the one paragraph holds hands with the next paragraph, and then see if you start mapping this out on a piece of paper or in a mind map, whether there's a logical flow. If there isn't a logical flow, then you go back to your building blocks and you start building the information together. So what I find currently in my supervision practice, I spend 99% of my supervision time rearranging students' writing, rearranging their logical argumentation, rearranging topics, rearranging information under paragraphs, and it is such an immense waste of definitely my time, because that's not what I'm supposed to do as a supervisor, but that I can't even start evaluating an argument or a thesis statement because the writing is messy. And I can see that when I see messy writing, I know that the thinking is often also messy. So please try and do the mind mapping thing, or whatever works for you. If you write topics on sticker notes and you order them on the wall, or you have an electronic way of mapping things out, then please do so before you start writing. And this might also then help you to order your ideas in a logical format. So an exercise that you can do after this is start writing out your topic sentences. You can do this on a piece of paper, or you can do it on your computer, and then see if they are in logical order, if they hold hands with the parent or with the thesis. And then ask yourself, does the ordering make sense? If it doesn't, you now have ways to remedy that. Another way of talking about an argument is that your argument has a claim, it has reason, it has evidence, and it has a conclusion. So your claim is usually your topic sentence. You might, underneath that topic sentence in that paragraph, tell the reader what is the reasons for making that claim, what's the evidence that you provide, and that what conclusion do you come to. Now, this can happen on a paragraph level already. So your claim is your topic, usually your topic sentence. Then in your paragraph, you will discuss the reasons for your claim. You will provide the reader with reach a conclusion, much the same as the equation that I presented you with earlier. So now we've looked at your argument, which contains your thesis statement. We've looked at your paragraphs, how they link together to present your argument. And what we're going to spend a bit of time on now is the aspect of evidence. So once you have your topic sentence or your claim, the reasons why you make your claim, you need to provide evidence. Now, your evidence in different parts of your dissertation or your thesis is made up of different aspects. In the beginning, your evidence is made up out of literature. Once you've collected your data and you start writing up your data or your findings or your results, this might become your evidence. But in the proposal stage or in the earlier stages, your evidence is mainly your literature. So it's critical that we look at the quality of our evidence. And in order to evaluate our quality of our evidence, we need to evaluate the quality of our sources. So our sources refers to literature. It could be in a number of forms. It could be journal articles. It could be previous dissertations or theses that's unpublished or published. It could be acts. It could be grey literature. It could be a number of sources, but especially with journal articles, it's very important to evaluate how reputable is the source. Is the resource, what is the reputation from the journal where you are gathering the source from? I usually find that students haphazardly just cite anything that speaks to their topic without critically looking at the reputation of the source or the reputation of the journal. So top-rated journals usually have a high reputation, and that's why I often advise or I insist that my students identify the top 5 journals in their field or related to the topic that they are investigating. And the reason for this is so that we already know that the sources that they are quoting is from a reputable source. So is the source current? Current usually is between 3 and 5 years old. And I get a lot of students asking me and going into a state of panic, but oh, I've done my literature review and my sources are between 3 and 5 years old. Now, when your examiner looks at your argument, they're also going to look at the sources that you use as evidence. If your sources is dated, then your argument is going to be dated. And I often find this problematic for a few reasons and at different junctures in the supervision space. It might be that you started developing your research proposal and it maybe takes you 2 years to complete your research proposal, or you maybe in the past had 2 years to complete a proposal. Now, at that end of 2 years, many things might have changed. So say, for instance, you started your proposal in 2020, for instance. It was maybe the start of the pandemic. You're now ready to hand in your proposal, but the pandemic is now maybe not, it's not definitely not at the height of the pandemic anymore. The restrictions are different. The effects that you maybe study is either addressed or it's different now. So we are now in a post-pandemic phase, for instance. We are no longer in the early stages of the pandemic, neither are we in the middle possibly of the pandemic. So you need to now also make sure that your topic is current and that your topic and your thesis statement now is aligned to current discourses. So it's also very problematic if your sources are old when you start off your dissertation and your thesis. By the time you hand in for examination, your sources are going to be seen as dated. So please start and write when you are providing evidence in terms of your sources that they are the most recent sources that you can find, so that they are still seen as recent by the time you submit for examination, and definitely by the time you want to publish. If they are not, you're going to need to redo your literature review if you now want to publish, because your sources might have been dated from the very start. So I am very anal about this. I know students get very frantic because they're often told about this too late, or their supervisors don't tell them to look at the recency of their sources. But it's critical. If your sources are dated, then your reading is dated. If your reading is dated, your argument is going to be dated. So it's very, very important that you keep, that you are current when you start off, that you're current and update your writing as you progress, and that your sources are still current and the debates are current and updated by the time you hand in. So the process is never complete. You will never complete your introduction, and it never changes. You will never maybe complete your literature review until the day you hand in, because there is a current reiteration of new reading, new understanding, new developments, new discourses. Then very important is the source peer-reviewed, and we are speaking about journal articles here. There's a lot of rogue journals out there. There's a lot of rogue publishing out there. So please evaluate whether the journals that you so easily get when you Google and just find any source that relates to your topic and use it, whether it is actually reputable and peer-reviewed. What is the source's impact factor? Here again, we talk about the journal impact factor. The higher the journal impact factor, the more reputable the source, and the more you can rest assured that you are dealing with the most current authors and the most current discussions. Then also you could have a look at the author. Is the author from a reputable institution? Or is the author someone that is being paid by a remote company to write information, and that is put out there as reliable and as truth? And then very important, have you seen this author cited in other sources? So when you have identified your top journals, you will probably also be able to identify the top authors that publish in these journals and are published in terms of the related field or your topic. So now that we've looked at our evidence and we have looked at the quality of our evidence, when we look at sources, when you now do your write-up of your findings, you will have similarly an argument that you are presenting, and you have evidence. Your evidence is now just your data. So even in your write-up of your findings or your analysis, you would still have topics, and you would still present a claim. You will present the evidence. This is now your data, and you will reach a conclusion. So you very much, even when you write up your findings, have this a similar equation that you can use. So when we talk about evidence, either in the beginning or when you're writing up your findings, your evidence is analyzed, it's discussed, it's described, it's evaluated. So when we talk about the E in evidence, it means that our evidence is analyzed, discussed, described, and evaluated. And that goes back to our equation for an argument. So your argument should be present throughout your dissertation or your thesis. Your main claim is made throughout and supported by evidence throughout. without this, you cannot reach a conclusion. So your argument in terms of your evidence to reach a conclusion needs to have all these aspects. The next slide is a slide that I've just put in for you. It's not actually a slide, it's a piece of writing. And I don't necessarily want to read from it because it gives quite a lot of information, but that you can maybe read through it. And there is some very good tips in terms of writing. So it gives you tips about how to connect ideas, and many of this we have now discussed. But also gives you some remedies. So if you find that your ideas don't connect, add a transition, a pronoun, a synonym, or another sentence, for instance. What to do with very long sentences. Now, 25 words or more is a long sentence. So if you find that you have these very long sentences, can you write them more clearly and more concisely? Each sentence or each paragraph, you need to ask, is it necessary to the paragraph? Does it add something? Could it be eliminated completely, partially? Could it be combined? So read each sentence word by word. Is every word necessary? Can it be rewritten in a shorter, clearer way? Could passive verbs be rewritten as active ones? Now, the issue around repetition, lack of variety, I've spoken about repetition. Please refrain from repeating the same information over and over again. So evaluate the purpose of your sentences. Can you combine it? Is it in the right place? Read the first 5 words of each sentence. And make sure that each sentence doesn't start in the same way. Look at the length of sentences. There should be a variety of short and long sentences, and you can either make them shorter by dividing them or making them longer by combining them. So if each sentence is, for instance, 5 words, you'll put your reader to sleep, because it's just a drum, 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 drum. So you want to keep your reader engaged by having sentences of different lengths. And if you find words which you repeat a lot, please have a look at the thesaurus and find other words to use. It's also very boring and very repetitive. Also refrain from words of should. They should. I find that very, very often. Please also be very careful of using vague words such as it. It is vague. I don't know what it refers to, so be specific. They and them also very vague, specifically who are you referring to? So there's some information on sentence structure. I'm not going to go through this because this is very basic writing. Word choice. Also make sure that your words are clear. And as we said in the very beginning, make sure that you understand the words that you are using. And then clarity, non-English structure. If I start reading your submissions or examining a thesis and it's difficult for me to read, I lose interest. Once I've lost interest, I become irritated. Once I have to read something more than once or twice and it's not clear, I become very subjective. If I'm an examiner, by this time I am already looking at a final mark. That's not good. So if you submit work to your supervisor and they need to read it more than once or more than twice, and they can't understand what you are writing, you need to go back to your building blocks. And there's some ideas if reading it out loud. did you write what you meant to say? So I often find when I read students' work, I think to myself, at one stage, I had a reader, and in the evenings I would lie in bed and have the reader read a student's submission to me. And it becomes so evident so quickly that when you read and you listen to your writing, that you will pick up that things don't make sense or there's not a logical order. So read your writing out loud or record it while you read it and listen to it and listen whether it makes sense. So this is on a very, very basic level, but it is so critical. If you can't put your ideas in writing in a logical format, then the best research goes to waste. So it is so critical that you get the basics right and that you also get the more advanced argumentative issues right. So on that note of doom and gloom, there is some help. There is amazing apps that can help you, and there is amazing research support. So please, I've given you some very basic links to the UNISA library. Please visit the UNISA library for the research support page for research support and different apps that could help you with your writing. There is a great number of apps. There are apps that could help you identifying journals. There's apps that can help you find search engines. There's apps that can help you with your referencing, your styling. So please, I've given you the link. Please visit the library site and have a look at the research skills site. There are also guidelines in terms of conducting a literature search, and I've given you the link to that. Also, there is a free app called, or a program called Grammarly, Grammarly Writing Assist. There's two versions of Grammarly, and the one is a free version, and it would already help a long way with your writing. The free version. The version that you subscribe to works out to about 300 Rand a month. It depends on what time of the year you buy it. You might definitely want to consider Black Friday coming up, I think, next month. They usually have amazing annual subscription deals around Black Friday, where you could possibly get the full subscription for a year for about 100 Rand a month, for instance. I find that even though I'm paying 300 Rand now, that it is worth every single cent. It not only helps you with your spelling, it helps you with your grammar. And if you have the paid version, it also helps you to identify sentences that's incorrectly structured, that's written in the passive tense, and it gives you writing tips as you go along. So I find it indispensable. You can download the app on your emails. It checks your emails as well for spelling, grammar. It checks, so you can use it on your desktop in all writing. So I really, really highly recommend, if you can at all, to please invest in it. The next slide, I often have students asking me, what are literature searches databases? And I've just given you some databases for different subject or fields, but please go to the UNISA library site. There are many, many more databases that you can use. These are just some of the databases that you can use for your literature searches, and you can also know that the formal databases are peer-reviewed and are in high esteem. So other than Google Scholar, these databases are legit, and they are already they all peer-reviewed. So I'm going to end off with just some checklist where you can go back to your writing and see if your aspects or your different sections of your writing adheres to the issues on the in the checklist. So the introduction checklist, please make sure that your opening is strong, that it has a strong hook, and that it catches your reader's attention. The first sentence should be interesting. That the article starts with a question, or in terms, so this is in terms of writing articles. In an article, your introduction would state your question or your problem statement. In your dissertation or thesis, this will come later. So that the focus is indicated, or your main idea is indicated, the importance of the topic is indicated, careful consideration of your thesis statement. If you do write an article, that your research is based on current debates in terms of the research problem, and the reason for dealing with the topics are justified. Purpose and aim of the article is stated, and the scope of the article is stated. So this is in terms of writing for articles, but your introduction in terms of your proposal or of your research follows the same. Strong opening grabs the reader's attention. There's a strong thesis statement that you are able to find, and the scope of your study is indicated. Your literature review, that it's a critical review of literature, not just a list of quotations. That there's coherent conceptual structuring. So go back to the same equation that we've discussed. In terms of coherent conceptual structuring, you can be sure that it would meet this criteria if you have used the equation that we have used. That it's focused and complete, it's balanced and not biased. We've talked about the currency, and that it includes major works of thought leaders. In terms of your argument checklist, make sure that your argument is valid, that the statements are factually correct, there's logical reasoning, that each part of the argument is concluded before the next part, that the conclusion follows logically after a reasoned position is given, and that recommendations are relevant to the data and the conclusion. And this is based on your, once you have written up your findings, your final conclusion. Your findings and results section, make sure that the data is reliable, valid, relevant, and trustworthy, that the results and findings are clearly explained, and that the results and findings are interpreted and alternative interpretations are considered. So in as much as you are stating your argument or doing your literature review, that there's also alternative interpretations, and there is no speculation, that it's evidence-based. And then finally, your conclusion checklist, make sure that all sections of your research are referred to, that it mirrors the introduction, that words as must, can, should are avoided, and that the need for further research is acknowledged. And very important, your conclusion does not contain new data. So we are back where we started with our introduction, when I said that your conclusion needs to mirror your introduction. And that's been quite a mouthful for tonight. I want to please point you to two very helpful books. They are older books, but I find them very, very practical. The first one is Finding Your Way in Academic Writing. It was published in 2004, but it is still available. It costs 435 Rand. I just checked this earlier today. Much of what I've presented to you tonight is described in this book, Academic Writing. It's an easy read, it's easy to follow, and it will help you greatly with your academic and your scholarly writing. And then there's another book which I really find a treasure. It is The Craft of Research, and it is by Booth et al. You can order it from Take-A-Lot. It is still available. I think it's a 2016 edition, but it is still available. And you can get it from Take-A-Lot for 395 Rand. So between maybe at the start of your journey, one or at least or two of these books, plus a Grammarly subscription will really help you a long way in terms of your scholarly writing. So to end off with, it looks easy. I often find that when I do these presentations, students walk away and they think, oh, that's easy peasy to do. I can do that, until they have to do it. So it's not as easy. It's a craft. It's and not an art. It's a craft, meaning that you work at it. As any craftsperson would, the more you do it, the better you get at the craft. It's not about words and sentences, but it's knowing how to put words and sentences together in a compelling way. And if you remember nothing else, if you remember this, that it's not about the words, the sentences and the paragraphs, but about how you put it together in a compelling way to argue your main point. It takes practice, it takes time. You get better by reading and writing, always critically. And with this, I hope that some aspects might have been an eye-opener for you. Some aspects maybe just gave you a peek through the keyhole, and that you can go and look at certain aspects more fully, read up on it, or that you know have some signposts that would signal you to maybe go back to your writing, evaluate your writing, polish it, and critically read it and read it aloud before submitting to your supervisor or before submitting your final proposal, which I think is either now done or you are submitting it quite soon for those of you that's in the proposal stage. So at this stage, at ending off with these thoughts, I hope that it has assisted you in some way or another. So from here on, I am just going to see if there's been any if you have posted any questions, if anyone maybe had their hand at trying to develop a thesis statement. I'm just waiting for the upload here. Yeah, Zanile, thank you so much, Prof. Very helpful session, and asking for the presentation. Yes, sure. So the recording is available as always. I'm just waiting to see if there is any other questions. Let's just have a look. I have little mania, Deneo, or little blobs, but doesn't look as if there are any published questions at the moment. So I'm going to give you a second or two if there's, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just going to see if there's any updates. But on my side, I don't know, Deneo, if there's anything on your side, but on my side, I don't see any questions or any comments. All right, so there's still no questions. I'll give it another minute or so, and let's just see if there's maybe any questions on your side. Otherwise, I hope you have enough signposts for you to go back on. Some things that maybe stimulated your thinking, or that you that you might go back on. Thank you for the tips on academic writing. Indeed, it's not easy, but it gets better daily. I fully agree. We never arrive in terms of writing, and you know, even myself, I still follow when I read something and I think, oh, but they had an interesting way of putting it. There was a post, and I find it in different places. I had this amazing post on LinkedIn. So, you know, sometimes you find inspiration in the most unusual spaces. This was a post that on LinkedIn, and I thought it was so catching. This is a scholar in the field of online learning, and he's a well-known scholar. And he had written an article in the Globe and Mail, and for his LinkedIn post, he had this very catching phrase. And I thought, well, this is an excellent example of an argument and a catching topic. The title said, "We need to get online learning right before the next crisis hits." Now, that's a very provocative statement. So I immediately looked at what the link says. So I opened it up a bit more and listened to this well-argued position. He says, "I argue that ditching online learning now, as most schools and universities seem eager to do, guarantees a disappointing future. I share 3 reasons." Here comes his opinions, or later follows as evidence. First, our schools and universities are going to face new crises for which we will need online learning, including ongoing and urgent climate emergencies. Secondly, many are unable to access in-person education, including those who live remote and rural settings, and those with disabilities. Ditching online learning limits their access to education, raises barriers to aspiration, and excludes them. Now, remember in the beginning I said, watch out for they and them. What is different here is that he is now not writing to academic audience, but he is writing to the LinkedIn audience, which then takes them to his formal paper that was published. And then thirdly, the modality is considered inferior even when we know that it makes or breaks online learning. It is about the design. And I thought that was such a provocative way of catching the reader, of making a very substantive claim in terms of online learning, giving the reasons why he ascribes to that claim, and then links it to his formal research. So this is also very important when we spoke about voice earlier on, that your voice changes for different audiences. In this description of this author, his voice was adapted for a general audience on the LinkedIn app or the LinkedIn platform. His voice is different when he writes for an academic audience, but a very provocative statement, also a very provocative reason. So I'm definitely interested. So in the end, you want to provoke the same with your audience that you are writing for. They must want to read more, and you need to make it easy for them. Okay, so from my side, thank you so much. Thank you for still attending these sessions, although it's later on in the academic year, and all the best with your future studies and your endeavors. May you become great and accomplished writers. Good night.